Emma Turner clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders as her father's voice thundered through their modest homestead on the outskirts of Clifton, Arizona. The year was 1878, and at 19 years of age, Emma found herself in a predicament that had turned her family against her and left her future hanging precariously in the balance. "You've brought shame upon this family," Jacob Turner roared, his weather-beaten face contorted with rage as he paced the small front room of their home. 3 months along with child and no husband to speak of. What did you expect would happen? Emma's mother, Martha, sat silently in the corner, her hands trembling as they worked a piece of mending. She wouldn't look at her daughter, hadn't properly looked at her since the discovery of Emma's condition 2 weeks prior. "Father, please," Emma pleaded, one hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "I loved him. Richard promised he would return." "Richard Caldwell was a snake," her father spat. "The moment that mining company offered him better prospects in Colorado, he was gone without a backward glance. He won't be coming back for you, or that bastard you're carrying." The truth of her father's words stung worse than any physical blow. Richard had sworn his love, promised marriage, then disappeared when the Silverado Mining Company had offered him a position as a foreman. His last letter had arrived 6 weeks ago, and Emma now understood there would be no more. "I won't have a fallen woman under my roof," Jacob declared, his decision apparently made. "There's only one solution. I've spoken with Henry Miller." "The traitor!" Emma's blood ran cold. Henry Miller owned the general store in Clifton and was known for his various business dealings, not all of them entirely above board. "He knows people passing through who might take you on, for a price." Her father wouldn't meet her eyes now. "It's arranged for tomorrow. You're selling me." Emma whispered, her voice barely audible as the horrible realization dawned on her. "Your own daughter. We're securing you a husband," her mother finally spoke up, though her voice wavered. "Someone who'll take you despite your condition." "I won't go." Emma stood, panic rising in her chest. "You cannot simply sell me off like cattle. You'll do as you're told." Her father slammed his fist against the wall. "You think anyone in Clifton will have you now? You think any decent family will associate with us after what you've done? This way, at least you'll have a name to give that child, and we can hold our heads up again." Emma's younger sister, 12-year-old Grace, peered fearfully from behind the bedroom door, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Go to your room, Emma," her mother said softly. "We leave for town at first light." With tears streaming down her face, Emma retreated to the small bedroom she shared with Grace. Her mind raced with desperate thoughts of escape, but where could she go? With no money, no friends willing to defy her father, and a baby on the way, her options were non-existent. "Emmy," Grace's small voice came as she slipped into the room. "Are you really leaving?" Emma pulled her sister into a tight embrace. "I don't know what's going to happen, Gracie." "I heard Pa talking to Ma," Grace whispered. "He said Mr. Miller would auction you off to the highest bidder tomorrow in the back room of the store." Emma's stomach churned with dread and humiliation. To be sold like property, her future decided by whoever was willing to pay the most for a disgraced woman carrying another man's child. What kind of man would even bid on such an arrangement? The possibilities terrified her. Sleep evaded Emma that night as she lay staring at the ceiling, one hand resting on her stomach, whispering promises to her unborn child that somehow, she would find a way to protect them both. The morning came too quickly. Emma was given her best dress to wear, a simple blue cotton with white trim that she'd sewn herself last spring. Her mother helped her with her hair, twisting it into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. "This is for the best, Emma," her mother murmured, though she sounded as if she was trying to convince herself more than her daughter. The wagon ride to town was conducted in stony silence. Emma sat rigidly between her parents, her small carpetbag of possessions clutched in her lap. Clifton was already bustling with activity when they arrived, the main street lined with horses and wagons as people went about their business. Miller's general store stood prominently at the center of town. As they approached, Emma noticed an unusual number of men milling about outside, smoking and talking in low voices. Her cheeks burned as she realized they must be there, for her word traveled fast in Clifton. Henry Miller greeted them at the door, a thin smile on his face. "Jacob, Martha," he nodded, then his gaze settled on Emma. "And the young lady in question, right on time." "Let's get this over with," Jacob muttered, gripping Emma's elbow and steering her through the store toward the back room. Emma felt dozens of eyes on her as she walked, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor. The shame was overwhelming, but beneath it, a spark of anger began to grow. How could her parents do this to her? How could a community that had watched her grow from a child now view her as nothing more than damaged goods to be traded? The back room of Miller's store had been cleared of its usual storage. About 15 men stood around, some leaning against the walls, others seated on hastily arranged chairs. They fell silent as Emma entered. "Gentlemen," Miller announced, moving to stand beside Emma. "As discussed, we have here Miss Emma Turner, 19 years of age, in good health, skilled in cooking, sewing, and household management. She finds herself in need of a husband due to unfortunate circumstances." The men's eyes moved to her midsection, though her condition wasn't yet visible. "She's carrying a child, about 3 months along by my understanding," Miller continued matter-of-factly. "Her father is looking for a man of means who can provide for her and the coming child. In exchange for taking on this responsibility, a dowry of $30 plus the girl's belongings will be provided." Emma's knees threatened to buckle. $30. That was all her father valued her at, and he wasn't even selling her, he was paying someone to take her away. "Let's start the bidding at $5, Miller said. "Who'll give me $5 for the hand of Miss Turner?" An older man with a gray beard raised his hand. "5." "10, called another, a sweaty, red-faced cattle driver Emma recognized from town. "15, said a third, a man she didn't know whose eyes never left her chest as he spoke. Emma closed her eyes, willing herself not to faint. This couldn't be happening. $20, came a new voice, deep and steady. Emma's eyes flew open. Near the back of the room stood a tall man she had never seen before. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: denim trousers, a simple cotton shirt with a vest, and worn boots. What caught her attention was his face tanned from the sun, with striking blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with a neatly trimmed beard and an expression that, unlike the others, held no lechery or amusement, only calm determination. 25, countered the cattle driver, looking annoyed. 30, the stranger replied immediately. The room fell silent. $30 was the amount of the dowry itself, meaning he would effectively be taking Emma for free, with no profit to himself. 35, said the older man with the gray beard, eyeing the stranger suspiciously. The tall cowboy straightened up from the wall he'd been leaning against. $60. A murmur ran through the room. Miller looked startled. "Gentleman offers $60. Do I hear any other bids?" Emma stared at the stranger in confusion. Why would anyone offer double the dowry when no further bids came? Miller cleared his throat. "Sold for $60 to." He looked questioningly at the cowboy. "Harrison Evans," the man supplied, stepping forward. His eyes met Emma's briefly, and she was surprised to see compassion there. "Well then, Mr. Evans," Miller said, If you'll step into my office to complete the transaction with Mr. Turner." Jacob looked equally confused by the high bid, but followed Miller and Evans into the small office adjacent to the back room. Emma remained standing awkwardly as the other men began to disperse, many casting disappointed glances her way. After what seemed like an eternity, the office door opened and the three men emerged. Harrison Evans approached Emma, removing his hat respectfully. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "If you're amenable, I've spoken with your father and Mr. Miller about making this arrangement official immediately. The judge is available this morning." Emma stared at him blankly. "Official marriage, miss," he clarified. "I believe that was the purpose of today's proceedings." "You want to marry me today?" Emma couldn't hide her shock. "It seems the most proper course, given the circumstances," Evans replied, his blue eyes studying her face. "Unless you object, what choice did she have? This stranger had just paid $60 for her hand in marriage. He could demand they be wed immediately. If he wished, she was effectively his property now. Yet something in the way he asked, giving her the opportunity to object, stirred a tiny flicker of hope within Emma. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be as terrible as she had feared. "I have no objection, Mr. Evans," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Then if you'll accompany me, Miss Turner, we can speak with Judge Wilson." Her father approached, awkwardly extending a hand to Evans. "The papers are signed. She's your responsibility now." He didn't look at Emma as he spoke. "Pa," Emma began, but he shook his head. "Your mother has packed your things," he said, gesturing to her carpet bag and a larger valise that now sat by the door. "We wish you well." With that, her father turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing beside the stranger who had just bought her freedom and, in the same transaction, claimed her future. "Shall we?" Harrison Evans extended his arm to her. With trembling fingers, Emma placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. As they stepped out of the general store and into the bright Arizona sunshine, she found herself walking toward the courthouse beside a man she had never met, about to become his wife. The Clifton courthouse was a modest building of red brick, one of the few permanent structures in a town that was still largely comprised of wooden establishments. Judge Wilson, a portly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, seemed unsurprised by their arrival. "Mr. Evans," he greeted, rising from behind his desk, "and this must be the young lady. Miss Turner, is it?" "Yes, sir," Emma replied softly, still feeling as if she were moving through a strange dream. "I understand there's some urgency to this union," the judge said delicately. "There is," Harrison confirmed, his deep voice steady and matter-of-fact. "We'd like to be married today if possible." "Very well." Judge Wilson nodded. "Do you have witnesses?" "I've arranged for 2, Harrison said, and as if on cue, the door opened to reveal the town's schoolteacher, Miss Abigail Foster, and the local blacksmith, Samuel Powell. Emma was surprised to see Miss Foster, who had been her teacher until just a few years ago. The older woman gave her a kind, if somewhat pitying smile. "Well then," the judge said, "if you'll all gather round, we can proceed with the ceremony." The wedding itself was a brief, perfunctory affair. Emma stood in a daze, responding when prompted, repeating the vows in a voice that didn't sound like her own. Harrison Evans spoke clearly and confidently, his hand warm and steady as it held hers. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Wilson declared after just a few minutes. "You may kiss the bride." Emma tensed. This would be her first interaction with her new husband beyond their brief conversation. Harrison seemed to sense her unease and merely leaned forward to place a chaste kiss on her cheek. "Thank you, Judge Wilson," Harrison said, shaking the man's hand. He turned to the witnesses. And thank you both for coming on such short notice." Miss Foster approached Emma, taking her hands. "Mrs. Evans," she said, the new name sounding foreign to Emma's ears. "I wish you happiness." "Thank you, Miss Foster," Emma replied automatically. "If you need anything," the teacher whispered, "anything at all, please know my door is always open to you." Emma felt tears threatening at this small kindness, the first she'd received since her condition had been discovered. After signing the marriage certificate, Harrison guided Emma outside to where a sturdy wagon waited, already loaded with her few belongings. He helped her onto the seat with careful hands. "If you're ready, Mrs. Evans," he said, the formal address underlining the surreal nature of the situation, "we should start for home. It's a fair distance." "Where?" Emma hesitated, suddenly realizing she had no idea where this man lived or what awaited her. "Where is home, Mr. Evans?" "The Circle E Ranch," he replied, climbing up beside her. "About 20 miles north of town. It'll take us the better part of the afternoon to get there." As Harrison clicked to the horses and the wagon began to move, Emma caught a final glimpse of her father standing outside Miller's store, watching them depart. He raised a hand in what might have been farewell, but Emma turned away, facing forward toward whatever future awaited her with this stranger who was now her husband. The wagon rumbled out of Clifton, the buildings giving way to the rugged Arizona landscape. Emma sat stiffly beside Harrison Evans, a million questions racing through her mind but none finding their way to her lips. The events of the morning seemed unreal had she truly been sold by her family and married to a stranger, all in the span of a few hours. "You must be thirsty," Harrison said after they'd traveled some distance in silence. He reached behind the seat and produced a canteen. "The water's fresh." Emma accepted it with murmured thanks, suddenly aware of how dry her throat had become. The water was cool and welcome. "I imagine you have questions," Harrison said, his eyes remaining on the trail ahead. "Please feel free to ask them." Emma studied his profile, the straight nose, the firm jawline partially hidden beneath his neatly trimmed beard, the creases at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally, the most pressing question finding voice. "Why offer so much money for? For me?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "I don't believe people should be bought and sold," he said finally. "When I heard what was happening in town today, it didn't sit right with me." "Yet you participated in the bidding," Emma pointed out, a touch of bitterness in her voice. "It seemed the only way to stop it," he replied simply. "I could see how frightened you were." Emma looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "And now you're saddled with a wife you never wanted and another man's child." Harrison's expression remained unreadable. "I've been meaning to take a wife for some time," he said. "The ranch needs a woman's touch. As for the child—" He glanced briefly at her midsection. "Every child deserves a chance at life, regardless of the circumstances of their birth." His answer surprised Emma. It wasn't what she had expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had expected. A declaration of instant love seemed foolish, but his practical acceptance of her condition was more than most men would offer. "The Circle E Ranch," she said, changing the subject. "You own it?" Harrison nodded. "It was my father's. He passed 3 years ago, left it to me. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land with good water. We run about 200 head of cattle and keep some horses." "We?" Emma questioned. "Myself, my foreman Lucas Gentry, and 3 ranch hands Caleb, Javier, and Tom," Harrison explained. "And Mrs. Malone, who comes 3 days a week to help with cooking and washing. She lives in town with her son." The thought of meeting these strangers who would now be her household sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Emma. "I should warn you," Harrison continued, as if reading her thoughts. "They don't know about our marriage. It was a sudden decision on my part. They'll be surprised to see me return with a wife." Emma felt her cheeks flush. "And when they learn of my condition?" "That's your business to share or keep private as you choose," Harrison said. "But they're good men. They won't pass judgment." The wagon crested a small rise and Harrison pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing ahead. "That's the Circle E." Emma followed his gesture and saw a valley opening before them. At its center stood a large ranch house made of adobe and timber, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. A stream cut through the property, its course marked by a line of cottonwood trees. Cattle grazed on the grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Emma said truthfully. The ranch had a peaceful, prosperous look to it that she hadn't expected. "Thank you," Harrison replied, a hint of pride warming his voice for the first time. "My father built it from nothing. I've tried to honor his work by making it even better." As they descended into the valley, Emma noticed a rider approaching from the ranch. Harrison raised a hand in greeting as the man drew near. "Lucas," he called as the rider reached them. "Didn't expect to see you out this way." "Got worried when you didn't return last night," the man replied, tipping his hat. He was older than Harrison, perhaps in his 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face. His curious gaze moved to Emma. "Didn't expect to see you with company either." Harrison cleared his throat. "Lucas Gentry, allow me to introduce my wife, Emma Evans." Lucas's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Wife," he repeated, looking between them. "We were married this morning in Clifton," Harrison confirmed. Lucas recovered quickly, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "Madam, it's a pleasure. Congratulations to you both." "Thank you, Mr. Gentry," Emma replied softly. "Lucas, would you ride ahead and let the others know?" Harrison asked. "Ask Mrs. Malone to prepare the main bedroom and perhaps something special for supper." "Of course, boss," Lucas replied, still looking somewhat bemused. He touched his hat again to Emma. "Welcome to the Circle E, Mrs. Evans." With that, he turned his horse and galloped back toward the ranch. "I apologize for the surprise," Harrison said as they continued forward. "Lucas has been with the ranch since my father's time. He's more like family than an employee." Emma nodded, her anxiety building as they approached the ranch house. What would these people think of her, arriving unannounced as their employer's new wife? What would they say when they inevitably learned the circumstances of her marriage and her condition? As they drew closer, Emma could see activity around the house, figures moving with purpose, clearly preparing for their arrival. By the time Harrison guided the wagon into the yard, a small welcoming committee had assembled. 3 men stood in a line, presumably the ranch hands Harrison had mentioned, and beside them, a plump woman in an apron who could only be Mrs. Malone. All were dressed in their work clothes, but had made efforts to tidy themselves. Harrison set the brake and jumped down from the wagon, coming around to help Emma descend. His hands were strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that Emma could smell the leather and sunlight scent of him before he stepped back respectfully. "Everyone," he announced, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Emma Evans. Emma, this is our crew. Caleb Wilkins, Javier Mendoza, Tom Freeman, and Mrs. Eleanor Malone." There was a chorus of Madam and Mrs. Evans as hats were removed and heads nodded in greeting. Mrs. Malone stepped forward, a broad smile on her face despite the surprise that still showed in her eyes. "Welcome to your home, Mrs. Evans. We're delighted to have a mistress for the ranch at last. I've aired out the main bedroom and put fresh linens on the bed." "Thank you, Mrs. Malone," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I appreciate your kindness. Let's get you settled, Harrison said, nodding to the men to unload Emma's meager belongings from the wagon. You must be tired from the journey. Emma followed Harrison and Mrs. Malone into the ranch house, acutely aware of the curious glances that followed her. The interior was unexpectedly pleasant, a large main room with a stone fireplace, solid furniture made of dark wood, and touches that spoke of comfort rather than mere functionality. Navajo rugs brightened the plank floors, and the windows were large, letting in plenty of light. Mr. Evans has kept the house in good order, Mrs. Malone explained as she led them down a hallway, but it's wanted a woman's touch these past years. I do what I can on my days here, but it'll be nice to have a proper mistress overseeing things. She opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom containing a large four-poster bed, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand, and a wardrobe. A braided rug covered much of the floor, and curtains of faded blue cotton hung at the windows. This was Mr. Evans's parents' room, Mrs. Malone said. The master's been using the smaller room across the hall since his father passed, but I've moved his things in here now that you're married. Emma's eyes widened slightly at this reminder of the reality. She now faced sharing a bedroom, a bed with the stranger who was now her husband. Harrison must have noticed her expression because he quickly spoke up. Mrs. Malone, perhaps you could show Mrs. Evans the rest of the house while I speak with the men about tomorrow's work. Of course, Mr. Evans, Mrs. Malone agreed. Thank you. Harrison turned to Emma. I'll give you time to settle in. Supper is usually at 6 if that suits you. Emma nodded, grateful for his sensitivity to her discomfort. Yes, that would be fine, thank you. With a brief nod, Harrison left the room and Emma found herself alone with Mrs. Malone, who was already bustling about, adjusting curtains and straightening the already neat bedspread. It's a surprise, to be sure, the housekeeper said cheerfully. Mr. Evans returning with a bride, but a welcome one. He's needed a wife for years now, running this place all alone. And such a pretty young wife at that, it was. Rather sudden, Emma admitted, unsure how much to reveal. Mrs. Malone's eyes twinkled with understanding. Love often is, my dear. Now let me show you your domain. The kitchen is particularly fine. Mr. Evans's mother insisted on the best cookstove money could buy when they built the place. As the older woman led her through the house, pointing out various rooms and features, Emma's mind whirled with the dramatic change in her circumstances. That morning, she had awakened in disgrace in her parents' home, facing public humiliation and an unknown fate. Now, she was mistress of a substantial ranch, married to a man who seemed, if not loving, at least decent and respectful. Yet the question remained, what would happen when night fell and she was alone with her new husband? What would Harrison Evans expect from the wife he had purchased at auction? The tour concluded in the kitchen, where Mrs. Malone began preparations for the evening meal. I've planned a special supper to celebrate your arrival, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Please let me help, Emma said quickly, eager for something familiar to do amid so much change. I'm a capable cook, Mrs. Malone looked surprised but pleased. Well, aren't you eager to jump right in? Most new brides would be taking their ease after such a day, but I won't refuse an extra pair of hands. You could start peeling those potatoes while I prepare the roast. As Emma set to work, the rhythmic action of peeling potatoes calmed her racing thoughts. Mrs. Malone chattered away, filling Emma in on the rhythms of ranch life, the personalities of the hands, and bits of history about the Evans family. Mr. Harrison's parents, God rest them, built this place from nothing but sagebrush and dreams, she explained as she seasoned the roast. Mr. George Evans was a visionary, saw the potential in this valley when others passed it by. And Mrs. Evans, Sarah was her name, she was a real lady, came from back east with fine manners but wasn't afraid to work alongside her husband. When did she pass? Emma asked. 8 years ago now. Fever took her, hit the whole county hard that year. Mrs. Malone shook her head sadly. Mr. George was never the same after. Lived another 5 years but died of heartbreak as much as anything, if you ask me. They were devoted to each other, those two. And Mr. Evans Harrison has run the ranch since his father died, Emma clarified. Indeed he has, and done a fine job of it too. Expanded the herd, improved the bloodlines of the stock, even added that new wing to the house last year. Mrs. Malone lowered her voice confidentially. Many a local girl has set her cap for him, but he never showed interest. Too busy with the ranch, we all thought. But here he's gone and found himself a wife after all. Emma focused intently on the potato in her hands, avoiding Mrs. Malone's curious gaze. Yes, it was quite unexpected. Well, love is like that sometimes, the housekeeper said kindly. Strikes like lightning when you least expect it. Emma didn't correct the woman's assumption. Let her believe it was a love match, it was kinder than the truth. By the time supper was ready, Emma had changed into her one other dress, a simple green cotton that had seen better days, but was at least clean. She had washed her face and hands and pinned her hair up as neatly as possible, wanting to make a good impression on the household that was now her responsibility. Harrison knocked on the bedroom door just before 6. "May I escort you to supper, Mrs. Evans?" he asked formally when she opened it. "Thank you, Mr. Evans," she replied, equally formal as she placed her hand on his offered arm. The dining room table had been set with the ranch's best dishes and a vase of wildflowers at the center. The ranch hands had cleaned up considerably, wearing fresh shirts and with their hair slicked down with water. They stood as Emma entered the room. "Please be seated," she said, falling naturally into the role of hostess despite her nervousness. The meal began somewhat awkwardly, with the men clearly uncertain how to behave with a woman at the table. But as the excellent food was passed around, the atmosphere gradually relaxed. "Mrs. Malone tells me you helped prepare this feast," Harrison said to Emma as he cut into his roast beef. "It's delicious." "I merely assisted," Emma demurred. "Mrs. Malone deserves the credit." "Nonsense," the housekeeper said cheerfully. "Mrs. Evans has a natural touch in the kitchen. That gravy is entirely her doing." The conversation flowed more easily after that, with Harrison asking the men about the day's work and plans for the following day. Emma listened attentively, trying to absorb the workings of the ranch that was now her home. "We'll start moving the north herd to the upper pasture tomorrow," Harrison was saying. "Caleb, you and Tom can take point on that." "Yes, boss," Caleb replied, a young man perhaps only a year or two older than Emma herself. "Javier, I want you and Lucas to ride the south boundary," Harrison continued. "There have been reports of rustlers working their way up from the border." The Mexican ranch hand nodded seriously. "We'll keep watch, senor." "What about you, boss?" Tom asked, helping himself to more potatoes. Harrison glanced at Emma. "I'll be staying closer to home for the next few days. There are matters here that need my attention." Emma felt her cheeks warm at the implication that she was one of those matters. She kept her eyes on her plate, aware of the curious glances from the men. As the meal concluded, Mrs. Malone brought out the apple pie, setting it before Emma. "Perhaps the new mistress would like to serve," she suggested. Taking the offered knife, Emma carefully cut and distributed slices of the fragrant pie. As she handed Harrison his portion, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the contact. "Thank you," he said softly, his blue eyes meeting hers for a moment before she quickly looked away. After the meal, the men excused themselves to the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Malone insisted on handling the washing up alone. "You two newlyweds should have some time to yourselves," she said with a knowing smile that made Emma's anxiety return full force. Harrison led Emma to the porch, where two rocking chairs sat facing the spectacular sunset that painted the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold. The air was cooling rapidly, as it always did in the desert once the sun began to set. "Are you cold?" Harrison asked, noticing Emma's slight shiver. "A little," she admitted. He disappeared inside, returning moments later with a woolen shawl that he draped carefully over her shoulders. "This was my mother's," he explained. "It seems fitting for you to have it now." "Thank you," Emma said, touched by the gesture. "Mrs. Malone told me about your parents. They sound like remarkable people." "They were," Harrison agreed, settling into the chair beside hers. "They taught me everything I know about ranching, about life. My father always said a man's word is his bond, and my mother insisted that kindness was never wasted." They rocked in silence for a while, watching as the colors in the sky deepened and the first stars began to appear. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Harrison said finally, his deep voice quiet in the gathering dusk. "Being married to a stranger wasn't in your plans." Emma's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "No," she agreed softly. "It wasn't. I want you to know," he continued carefully, "that I have no expectations beyond what you're comfortable with. This marriage may have unusual beginnings, but I intend to be a good husband to you, Emma, and a good father to your child." Emma turned to look at him, studying his face in the fading light. His expression was earnest, his blue eyes steady and clear. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her since the moment he had bid for her in Miller's back room. "Why would you do this for a woman you've never met? Take on another man's child. There must be some reason beyond charity." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving out to the darkening landscape. "My mother was in a similar position once," he said finally, "before she met my father. She was young, alone, carrying a child conceived in circumstances she rarely spoke about. My father met her when she was working as a laundress in a mining town, barely surviving. He married her, gave her and her unborn child his name and protection." Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "You have an older sibling?" Harrison shook his head, a shadow of old grief crossing his face. "My brother William was born premature, lived only 2 days. But my father always said those were the proudest days of his life, being there for my mother and William when no one else would be." "I'm so sorry," Emma whispered. "My parents went on to have me a year later," Harrison continued. "They gave me a good life, taught me what it means to be a decent man. When I heard about your situation, well, I thought about what my father would have done." Emma felt tears welling in her eyes at his story. It explained so much about this man who had stepped forward to save her when everyone else had turned away. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "And thank you for what you did today. Whatever happens between us, I'll always be grateful for that." Harrison nodded, seeming relieved that she understood. "It's getting late," he observed as full darkness settled over the ranch. "You must be exhausted after such a day." They rose from the rocking chairs and went inside. Mrs. Malone had left but had prepared the bedroom with a lamp lit and the covers turned down on one side of the large bed. Standing in the doorway, Harrison cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'll sleep in my old room across the hall tonight," he said. "Give you some privacy to settle in." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Emma's chest. "You don't have to, I think it's best," he interrupted gently. "We're strangers yet, Emma. There's time enough for everything else when we're both ready." Emma nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Good night, then, Mr. Evans." "Harrison," he corrected with a small smile. "I think, as my wife, you should use my given name." "Good night, Harrison," she amended, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good night, Emma," he replied. "Sleep well." As she prepared for bed in the privacy of what was now her room, Emma found herself reflecting on the extraordinary events of the day. She had awoken that morning as Emma Turner, a disgraced daughter about to be sold by her family. She now lay down to sleep as Emma Evans, wife of a rancher and mistress of a prosperous home. Her hand moved to her stomach, where her child grew, unaware of the dramatic changes in their circumstances. "We're safe now," she whispered to the tiny life within her. "At least for now, we're safe." With that thought, she drifted into an exhausted sleep, the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch serving as a strange lullaby in her new home. Emma awoke the next morning momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating a room much larger and finer than any she had slept in before. The events of the previous day came rushing back: her father's decision to sell her, the humiliating auction at Miller's store, Harrison Evans's unexpected intervention, and their hasty marriage. She sat up slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. The slight nausea that had plagued her early mornings for the past few weeks was present, but manageable. Rising from the bed, Emma found her carpetbag and retrieved her hairbrush, working methodically to tame her long brown hair before pinning it up in her usual simple style. The house was quiet as she dressed in her blue cotton dress, the same one she had worn to town yesterday. Emma realized with a pang that her entire wardrobe consisted of just two everyday dresses, a Sunday dress and a nightgown, hardly befitting the mistress of a substantial ranch. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the hallway empty. A glance at the small clock on the mantelpiece in the main room showed it was just past 6 in the morning. Early, but on a working ranch, likely not the first hours of activity. The kitchen was empty, but showed signs of recent use: a coffee pot still warm on the stove, and a plate with crumbs on the table. Emma set about familiarizing herself with the space, opening cupboards and drawers to learn where things were kept. It was a well-appointed kitchen with good quality cookware and a pantry stocked with staples. Finding eggs, bacon, and the ingredients for biscuits, Emma decided to make herself useful. She had the biscuits in the oven and was turning the bacon in the skillet when Harrison appeared in the doorway. "Good morning," he said, seeming surprised to find her at work in the kitchen. "I didn't expect you to be up so early." "Good morning," Emma replied, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "I'm used to early hours. My father's farm required dawn rising." Harrison nodded, entering the kitchen and pouring himself another cup of coffee from the pot. "I've already had breakfast with the men, but those biscuits smell delicious." "Would you like some?" Emma asked. "There's plenty." "Thank you, but I should get to work," he declined politely. "Lucas and the others have already headed out to their tasks. Mrs. Malone will arrive around 9 to help with household matters." Emma nodded, turning her attention back to the bacon to hide her uncertainty. What was expected of her here? Was she merely to keep house, or were there other duties as the rancher's wife? As if reading her thoughts, Harrison spoke again. "I thought perhaps later today, if you're feeling up to it, I could show you around the ranch properly, help you get your bearings." "I'd like that," Emma said, looking back at him with a small smile. Harrison's expression softened. "I've also asked Mrs. Malone to take your measurements. There's a dressmaker in town who can make you some new clothes. As my wife, you should have whatever you need." Emma felt her cheeks warm. "That's very generous, but it's not generosity," Harrison interrupted gently. "It's what's right. "We may have had an unusual beginning, Emma, but this is a real marriage and I intend to provide for you properly." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of their strange situation, and perhaps a tentative step toward understanding. The moment was broken by the sound of the oven door creaking as Emma moved to check the biscuits. "They're done," she announced, using a towel to remove the hot pan. "They look perfect," Harrison said. "Perhaps I do have time for one before I head out." They shared a somewhat awkward but not unpleasant breakfast, with Harrison telling Emma about the day's work planned for the ranch, and Emma asking questions about the property and the cattle operation. By the time they had finished eating, the initial tension had eased somewhat. "I'll be checking fences in the north pasture this morning," Harrison said as he rose from the table, placing his hat on his head. "But I should be back around midday. We can take that tour then." Emma nodded. "I'll look forward to it." After Harrison left, Emma busied herself with cleaning the kitchen and exploring the rest of the house more thoroughly. It was a substantial home with 4 bedrooms, a study, the main living area, dining room, and kitchen. Everything was well built and maintained, though Emma noted touches that might benefit from a woman's attention: faded curtains that could use replacing, bare walls that might welcome pictures or decorations. Mrs. Malone arrived promptly at 9, her round face breaking into a smile when she found Emma already hard at work dusting the bookshelves in the main room. "My goodness, Mrs. Evans. Already taking charge, I see," the housekeeper exclaimed approvingly. "I wanted to make myself useful," Emma explained. "And please call me Emma. Mrs. Evans still sounds strange to my ears." Mrs. Malone chuckled. "It'll take some getting used to, I imagine. Now, Mr. Evans mentioned I should take your measurements for some new dresses. Shall we do that first?" The older woman produced a measuring tape from her basket and efficiently noted Emma's dimensions, tactfully making no mention of the slight thickening at Emma's waistline that was not yet obvious to a casual observer. "Mr. Evans said to order whatever you need, Mrs. Malone said as she jotted down numbers. "Mrs. Fletcher in town is an excellent seamstress. She can make everyday dresses, a proper riding outfit. You do ride, don't you, dear?" "Yes, though it's been some time," Emma admitted. "Well, you'll need to on a ranch this size. And of course, you'll want at least one nice dress for church and social occasions." Mrs. Malone's eyes twinkled. "There's to be a harvest dance in Clifton next month. Your first appearance as Mrs. Evans." Emma hadn't considered that aspect of her new position. She would now be a social figure in the community, expected to appear alongside her husband at various functions. The thought of facing the curious stares and whispers of townsfolk who might have heard the circumstances of her marriage made her stomach clench with anxiety. "Perhaps we could start with just the everyday items," she suggested. "I wouldn't want to impose too much expense at once." Mrs. Malone waved away her concern. "Nonsense. The Circle E is one of the most prosperous ranches in the county. Mr. Evans can well afford to dress his wife properly." They spent the next hour discussing fabrics, styles, and the various items Emma would need, with Mrs. Malone gently overriding Emma's modest suggestions with more appropriate selections for the wife of a successful rancher. By the end, Emma felt somewhat overwhelmed by the transformation being planned for her wardrobe, but also secretly pleased at the prospect of having new, pretty clothes for the first time in her life. True to his word, Harrison returned to the house around midday. He had clearly washed up before coming inside, his face and hands clean though his clothes still bore the dust of the morning's work. "Are you ready for that tour?" he asked Emma, who had just finished helping Mrs. Malone prepare a simple lunch of cold chicken, bread, and cheese. Yes, I'd like that, Emma replied, reaching for her shawl. You might want a hat instead, Harrison suggested. The sun is strong today. Mrs. Malone hurried to a closet and returned with a straw bonnet. This was Mrs. Evans's, your mother-in-law's, she explained. It might suit until you have your own. The bonnet was simple but well made, with a blue ribbon that complemented Emma's dress. She tied it under her chin, touched by this second offering of his mother's possessions. Harrison led her outside, where two horses waited, saddled and ready. One was a large bay gelding that Harrison introduced as his own mount, Rusty. The other was a smaller, dappled gray mare. This is Willow, Harrison said, patting the gray's neck. She's gentle and sure-footed. I thought she might suit you. Emma approached the horse cautiously. She's beautiful, she said, stroking the mare's soft nose. You need help mounting? Harrison asked, standing close. Emma hesitated. It had been nearly 2 years since she'd last ridden, and never on a side saddle like the one fitted to Willow. Yes, please, she admitted. Harrison's hands were strong and respectful as he helped her onto the horse, guiding her feet to the proper position in the side saddle, and ensuring she was secure before mounting his own horse. We'll take it slow, he promised as they set off at a walk. The ranch revealed itself to be even more impressive than Emma had initially thought. Harrison led her first to the barn and corrals, where several fine horses grazed or dozed in the midday sun. He explained that alongside the cattle operation, the Circle E bred and trained quality horses, selling them to the Army and to private buyers throughout the territory. They rode past fields where hay and corn grew to feed the livestock through winter, then up to a rise that overlooked the main grazing lands. Cattle dotted the landscape, black and brown against the tawny grass. 250 head now, Harrison said with quiet pride. Started with just 50 when my father bought this land. We're hoping to reach 300 by next spring. It's a beautiful property, Emma said sincerely. Your parents created something remarkable here. Harrison's expression softened at the mention of his parents. They did. My father had the vision, but my mother had the heart that made it a home. She planted those cottonwoods by the stream, insisted on the glass windows in the house when most settlers were still using oiled paper. She believed in creating beauty alongside practicality. As they continued their circuit of the ranch, Harrison pointed out the boundaries, the best grazing areas, and the problems they faced: water management during dry years, protection from rustlers, and the challenges of getting cattle to market. Emma listened attentively, asking questions and offering observations that seemed to please Harrison. Growing up on a small farm had given her a basic understanding of agriculture that translated well to ranch operations, even on this larger scale. They stopped by the stream for a rest, dismounting to let the horses drink. Harrison spread his coat on a flat rock for Emma to sit on, then sat nearby on the ground, leaning back against a cottonwood trunk. You seem to have a good grasp of ranching, he commented. That will serve you well here. My father's farm was much smaller, Emma replied, trailing her fingers in the cool water of the stream. But many of the principles are the same, I suppose. Mention of her father brought a shadow to her face that Harrison noticed. You wish to speak of your family? He asked carefully. Emma was silent for a long moment. I still can't quite believe what they did, she said finally, her voice quiet. That my father would sell me after one mistake. It was wrong, Harrison said firmly. No parent should cast aside a child that way, regardless of the circumstances. They were so ashamed, Emma continued, the words spilling out now that she had begun. When I told them about the baby, my mother cried for days. My father wouldn't look at me. Even my little sister was told to keep her distance, as if my disgrace might be contagious. She wiped away an errant tear. Richard, the baby's father, he promised to marry me before he left for Colorado, said he'd send for me once he was settled. The letters came regularly at first, then less often, then stopped altogether. By the time I realized I was with child, there'd been no word for weeks. Harrison's expression darkened. Did you try to contact him? Father wrote to the mining company, Emma admitted. They replied that Richard had moved on, left no forwarding address. I think perhaps he never meant to keep his promises. Men who make promises they don't intend to keep are not worthy of the name, Harrison said, a hint of anger in his normally calm voice. Your child deserves better. My child has better now, Emma said softly, her eyes meeting his. Thanks to you. Something shifted in Harrison's gaze, a warmth that hadn't been there before. I meant what I said yesterday, Emma. I intend to be a good father to your child. Our child, Emma corrected him hesitantly. If that's truly what you want. Harrison nodded, his expression solemn. Our child, he agreed. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the gentle sounds of the stream and the occasional calls of birds in the cottonwoods. We should head back, Harrison said eventually, rising and offering his hand to help Emma up. Mrs. Malone will be wondering where we are, and I promised Lucas I'd check the south boundary with him this afternoon. As he helped her mount Willow again, his hands lingered slightly longer at her waist than was strictly necessary. Emma felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest at the contact, not fear or anxiety, but a pleasant warmth that remained as they rode side by side back toward the ranch house. The next few weeks established a rhythm to Emma's new life at the Circle E Ranch. Each morning, she rose early to prepare breakfast for Harrison and occasionally for the ranch hands when they weren't out on distant parts of the property. Mrs. Malone came 3 days a week to help with larger household tasks, but Emma gradually took over more of the daily management of the house. Harrison proved to be a considerate husband, always treating Emma with respect and never pressuring her for the physical intimacy that would normally be expected in a marriage. He continued to sleep in the room across the hall, though they spent more time together in the evenings, talking on the porch or reading in the main room by lamplight. Emma found herself growing comfortable in his presence. Harrison was a good conversationalist with a quiet wit that sometimes surprised her into laughter. He was interested in her opinions and listened attentively when she spoke of books she'd read or ideas she had for improvements to the house. Her new wardrobe began to arrive from town in parcels brought by the supply wagon, practical cotton dresses for every day, a riding habit that allowed her to accompany Harrison on longer rides around the property, and a fine blue silk dress for social occasions that made her gasp when she first saw it. It's too extravagant, she protested when Harrison insisted she try it on. Nonsense, he replied with a small smile. Every woman deserves something beautiful. The dress fit perfectly, the skillful seamstress having allowed room for Emma's gradually expanding waistline without making it obvious that the garment was designed to accommodate her condition. When she emerged from the bedroom wearing it, Harrison's expression made her cheeks flush with pleasure. You look lovely, he said simply, but the admiration in his eyes spoke volumes more. As her 4th month of pregnancy progressed, Emma's condition became more noticeable. She was fortunate not to suffer severe morning sickness, though fatigue sometimes overwhelmed her in the afternoons. Harrison insisted she rest when needed, often bringing her a cup of tea or a book when he found her napping on the sofa in the main room. The ranch hands treated her with unfailing courtesy, tipping their hats and addressing her as Mrs. Evans with genuine respect. None made any mention of her condition or the unusual circumstances of her arrival, though Emma suspected they must know or at least guess the truth. Lucas Gentry, the foreman, proved to be particularly kind, often bringing her wildflowers he'd picked while riding the range or special treats from town when he made the journey. "My sister had 6 children," he told Emma one day as he presented her with candied ginger from the general store. Said this helped with the queasiness. It was Mrs. Malone, however, who became Emma's closest confidante. The motherly housekeeper offered practical advice about pregnancy and childbirth without judgment, having raised 5 children of her own. "Every baby is a blessing," she said firmly when Emma finally worked up the courage to speak openly about her situation. "And you've landed on your feet with Mr. Evans. I've known him since he was a boy, and there's not a finer man in the territory." "He's been very kind," Emma agreed. Mrs. Malone gave her a knowing look. "It's more than kindness I see when that man looks at you, Mrs. Evans. Mark my words." Emma felt her cheeks warm at the implication. It was true that she had caught Harrison watching her sometimes with an expression that seemed to hold more than mere concern or courtesy. And she could not deny that her own feelings toward him were evolving beyond simple gratitude. The harvest dance in Clifton approached, and with it, Emma's first public appearance as Harrison's wife. Despite her new dress and Mrs. Malone's encouragement, she felt increasingly anxious about facing the community. What if people know? She asked Harrison the evening before the dance as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "About how we met, about the baby." Harrison considered her question thoughtfully. "Some may know or suspect," he acknowledged. "Clifton is a small town and gossip travels fast. But you are my wife now, Emma. That's all that matters. And if they're unkind," she pressed, voicing her deepest fear. Harrison's expression hardened slightly. "Then they'll answer to me," he said simply. "But I think you'll find most people more welcoming than you expect. The West is full of people who came here for second chances." The night of the dance arrived, and Emma spent extra time on her appearance, arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than usual and pinning a silk flower from her new bonnet to the bodice of her blue silk dress. The gown's clever design disguised her changing figure, though Emma knew her condition would soon be impossible to hide. Harrison, dressed in his best suit with a clean-shaven face and neatly trimmed hair, stared at her with undisguised admiration when she emerged from the bedroom. "You are beautiful, Emma," he said, his voice deeper than usual. "Thank you," she replied shyly. "You look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm with a smile. "Shall we show Clifton what the Circle E has to offer?" The town hall had been transformed for the harvest dance, with autumn leaves and corn stalks decorating the walls and tables laden with food brought by families from miles around. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, and couples already whirled around the cleared space in the center. Emma felt dozens of curious eyes turned toward them as they entered, Harrison's tall figure protective beside her. There was a momentary lull in conversation before people resumed their activities, though many began making their way toward the newcomers. "Mr. Evans, so glad you could join us." The mayor of Clifton, a portly man named Williams, approached with his wife. "And this must be your bride. We've heard so much about you, Mrs. Evans." Emma's grip tightened on Harrison's arm, but his steady presence gave her courage. "Thank you for the welcome, Mayor Williams," she replied with a polite smile. "It's lovely to meet you." What followed was a blur of introductions, as it seemed every resident of Clifton wanted to meet the new Mrs. Evans. Emma was surprised by the genuine warmth of most greetings, though she noticed a few sidelong glances and whispered comments among some of the older women. Harrison remained close, his hand often at the small of her back, a silent support that Emma appreciated more than she could express. When the band struck up a waltz, he turned to her with a question in his eyes. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. Emma hesitated. "I'm not very practiced," she admitted. "We didn't have many dances in our community." "I'll lead," Harrison promised, extending his hand. The first tentative steps were awkward, but Harrison was patient, guiding her gently until Emma relaxed into the rhythm. Soon they were moving smoothly among the other couples, Harrison's hand warm at her waist, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "Everyone is watching us," Emma murmured, suddenly self-conscious again. "Let them watch," Harrison replied, drawing her slightly closer. "They're seeing what a lucky man I am." The sincerity in his voice made Emma's heart skip a beat. This was not merely gallantry, there was genuine feeling behind his words. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself enjoying the festivities more than she had anticipated. The food was delicious, the music lively, and with Harrison at her side, even the occasional cool glance from town matrons couldn't diminish her spirits. She was resting at one of the tables, watching Harrison speak with some of the local ranchers, when a young woman approached and sat beside her. "Mrs. Evans, I'm Sarah Miller, Henry Miller's daughter," she introduced herself. Emma tensed at the name, memories of the auction in Miller's store flooding back. "Miss Miller," she acknowledged cautiously. The young woman leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I wanted to tell you how glad I am that Mr. Evans bought your contract that day. My father—" She hesitated. "My father's business dealings aren't always to my taste, but in this case I think things worked out for the best." Emma stared at her in surprise. "You know about—" Sarah nodded. "I overheard my father discussing it with your father before the auction. I was horrified, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. When I heard Mr. Evans had stepped in and married you right away, I was so relieved." "Thank you for telling me," Emma said, touched by the young woman's concern. "And I want you to know," Sarah continued earnestly, "not everyone in town shares the narrow views of some. My friend Martha is in a similar condition and her husband is away with the army. We support each other. Perhaps you join us for tea sometime." Before Emma could respond, Harrison appeared at her side, his expression questioning as he noticed the intensity of the conversation. "Everything all right?" he asked, his hand coming to rest protectively on Emma's shoulder. "Yes," Emma assured him, smiling up at him with genuine warmth. "Miss Miller was just inviting me to tea." The ride home from the dance was peaceful, the night air cool and clear with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Emma sat close to Harrison in the wagon, their shoulders touching, a comfortable silence between them. "Thank you for tonight," she said as the lights of the ranch house came into view. "I enjoyed myself much more than I expected to." Harrison smiled down at her. "I'm glad. You charmed everyone there, Emma, just as I knew you would." As he helped her down from the wagon, his hand strong at her waist, Emma made a decision. Standing on tiptoe, she leaned up and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Harrison," she whispered, then turned and hurried into the house, her heart racing at her own boldness. Behind her, Harrison stood motionless for a long moment, his hand rising to touch the spot where her lips had been. The next morning brought a change in the weather, with dark clouds rolling in from the west and a chill wind that rattled the windows of the ranch house. By midday, rain was falling steadily, and Harrison and the ranch hands returned early from their work, soaked to the skin. Emma busied herself providing hot coffee and dry clothes, noting with concern that Harrison seemed unusually quiet, his normally clear eyes clouded with what appeared to be more than just fatigue. "Are you feeling well?" she asked as he sat heavily in his chair by the fireplace after changing into dry clothing. "Just a chill," he assured her, though she noticed he suppressed a shiver. By evening, it was clear Harrison was ill. His forehead burned with fever, and a harsh cough had developed that worried Emma greatly. "It's nothing," he insisted when she suggested sending for the doctor from town. "Just a cold from the rain." But by morning, Harrison could barely rise from his bed. His breathing labored and his fever higher. Emma sent Javier riding for the doctor immediately, then set about doing what she could to ease Harrison's suffering. She remembered her mother's remedies for chest ailments: hot mustard poultices, willow bark tea for the fever, steam with pine needles to ease breathing. Working tirelessly, she applied these treatments while bathing Harrison's forehead with cool cloths and coaxing him to drink whenever he was conscious enough. Lucas and the other hands hovered anxiously, offering help where they could. Mrs. Malone arrived and gasped at the state of her employer. "Pneumonia," she said grimly, recognizing the symptoms. "My husband died of it 3 winters ago. We must pray the doctor comes quickly." Emma refused to leave Harrison's side, even when Mrs. Malone urged her to rest for the sake of her baby. "He saved me," she said simply. "I won't leave him." The doctor finally arrived late that afternoon, his examination confirming Mrs. Malone's diagnosis. "Pneumonia and a severe case," he told Emma privately after examining Harrison. "The next 24 hours will be critical. If the fever breaks, he has a good chance. If not—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Emma understood the grave implication. Pneumonia killed many strong, healthy people every year, especially in the isolated communities of the West where medical care was limited. "What can I do?" she asked, refusing to give in to the fear that clawed at her heart. The doctor gave her instructions for continuing the treatments she had already begun, adding a tincture of his own for the fever and cough. "Keep him warm, get fluids into him when possible, and watch for the fever breaking." That's all anyone can do now. Throughout that night, Emma maintained her vigil, dozing occasionally in the chair beside Harrison's bed but never leaving the room. She spoke to him continuously when he was conscious, telling him stories of her childhood, describing her hopes for their ranch, for their future together. "You must fight, Harrison," she whispered, holding his burning hand between her own. "Our child needs you, I need you." In the darkest hours before dawn, Harrison's fever reached its peak. He thrashed in delirium, sometimes calling for his mother, sometimes mumbling about cattle or ranch business. Once, clearly, he called Emma's name, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. "I'm here," she assured him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm right here, Harrison. Stay with me." As the first pale light of dawn crept through the curtains, Emma noticed a change. Harrison's breathing, while still labored, seemed less desperate. Placing her hand on his forehead, she realized with a surge of hope that the burning heat had lessened somewhat. By the time the doctor returned mid-morning, the change was unmistakable. The fever had broken, and though Harrison was weak, his mind was clear again. "You've been fortunate," the doctor told them both. "And you've had excellent nursing," he added with an approving nod to Emma. "Rest now, Mr. Evans. Complete recovery will take time, but the worst is past." When they were alone again, Harrison reached for Emma's hand. "You saved me," he said, his voice hoarse from coughing. Emma shook her head, tears of relief threatening. "You saved yourself. You're strong." "I heard you," Harrison continued, his blue eyes holding hers. "Talking to me through the fever, it gave me something to follow back." Emma blushed, wondering how much he remembered of her heartfelt words during the long night. "I couldn't bear to lose you," she admitted quietly. Harrison's fingers tightened around hers. "Come here," he said, patting the edge of the bed beside him. Emma hesitated only briefly before sitting carefully on the bed. Harrison reached up with a still weak hand to touch her cheek. "I think," he said slowly, "that I'm falling in love with my wife." The simple declaration stole Emma's breath. She had known her own feelings were changing, deepening beyond gratitude into something more profound, but she had not dared hope Harrison might feel the same. She began, then found her courage. I think I'm falling in love with my husband. Harrison's smile was tired but radiant. Then perhaps, when I'm well again, we might consider a proper beginning to our marriage. Emma understood his meaning and nodded, her cheeks flushing. I would like that very much. Harrison's recovery progressed steadily over the following weeks. Emma nursed him devotedly, gradually allowing him to resume light activities as his strength returned. Their evenings were spent together in the main room, often with Harrison reading aloud from one of the books in his father's collection, while Emma sewed baby clothes from soft flannel provided by Mrs. Malone. As Harrison regained his health, Emma's pregnancy became more pronounced, her condition now obvious to anyone who saw her. She felt the baby move for the first time one evening as she sat by the fire, the sensation like butterfly wings fluttering inside her. "Harrison," she gasped, her hand flying to her abdomen. "The baby, I felt it move." Harrison looked up from his book, his face lighting with interest. "Truly," Emma nodded, tears of wonder filling her eyes. "Here," she said impulsively, reaching for his hand and placing it against the swell of her stomach. "Wait a moment." They sat perfectly still, Harrison's large hand warm through the fabric of her dress. Then it happened again, a definite movement beneath their joined hands. Harrison's expression transformed with awe. "That's remarkable," he whispered, his eyes meeting Emma's. "Our child." The moment was intimate, profound, a turning point in their relationship. That night, when Emma prepared for bed, she found Harrison standing hesitantly in the doorway of the main bedroom, their bedroom. "If you're not ready," he began. "I understand. I can continue to use the other room." Emma took a deep breath, her heart racing not with fear but with anticipation. "I'm ready," she said softly. "If you are." Harrison crossed the room slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When he reached her, he raised one hand to cup her cheek gently. "I want to do this properly, Emma," he said, his voice low. "Not because of our arrangement or obligation, but because I care for you, deeply." "I care for you too," Emma whispered, leaning into his touch. Their first kiss was tentative, sweet, a question and an answer all at once. The second was deeper, more confident, a promise of things to come. That night, Harrison Evans and his wife truly became husband and wife in every sense. Their union born not from the transaction that had brought them together, but from the genuine feelings that had grown between them during their weeks together. Afterward, Emma lay in Harrison's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you all right?" he asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "More than all right," she assured him, tilting her face up to see his. "I never imagined I could be this happy again." Harrison kissed her forehead tenderly. "When I bid for you that day in Miller's store, I thought I was doing the right thing, the honorable thing. I never expected to find my own happiness in the process." "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked, a last lingering doubt surfacing. "Taking on another man's child." Harrison's hand moved to rest protectively over the swell of her stomach. "Never," he said firmly. "This child is ours, Emma. Just as my father claimed my brother as his own, I claim this child as mine. No one will ever tell them differently." Emma's eyes filled with tears at his words. "I love you, Harrison Evans," she said, speaking the words directly for the first time. His blue eyes darkened with emotion. "And I love you, Emma Evans, more than I thought possible." As winter settled over the Arizona territory, the Circle E Ranch prepared for the coming cold months. Hay was stored in the barn, cattle moved to more sheltered pastures, and the ranch house made snug against the winter winds. Emma's pregnancy progressed well, her body blossoming as the child within her grew. Harrison was attentive to her every need, ensuring she didn't overexert herself while respecting her desire to continue managing the household. "The baby will come in early February if my calculations are correct," Emma told Harrison as they lay together in their bed on a cold December night. "Just a few months more." Harrison's hand caressed the prominent curve of her abdomen, a gesture that had become habitual and cherished. "Have you thought about names?" he asked. They had never discussed this aspect of the coming child before, and Emma realized it was another step in Harrison's complete acceptance of their situation. "If it's a boy," she said hesitantly. "I thought perhaps William, after your brother." "Would that be all right?" Harrison's expression softened with emotion. "I would be honored," he said. "And if it's a girl," Emma smiled. "I was thinking of Sarah after your mother." Harrison gathered her close, his voice rough with feeling when he spoke. "You are an extraordinary woman, Emma Evans." As January brought bitter cold to the high desert, Emma found herself increasingly confined to the house. Her advancing pregnancy made movement more difficult, and Harrison insisted she avoid the icy paths around the ranch house. "I won't have you falling," he said firmly when she protested being treated like an invalid. "The baby will come soon enough, and then you can resume your usual activities." Emma conceded with good grace, using her time to finish preparing for the baby's arrival. A corner of their bedroom had been transformed with a cradle that Harrison had built himself, a rocking chair brought from town, and a chest filled with tiny garments sewn by Emma, Mrs. Malone, and several of the women from Clifton who had become friends during Emma's visits to town. One such friend was Sarah Miller, who had made good on her invitation for tea and introduced Emma to other young women in the community. Through these connections, Emma had discovered that while some in Clifton might still gossip about her unusual marriage, many more were supportive and kind. "Most folks around here have complicated stories," Sarah had explained during one visit. "That's why they came west in the first place, for a fresh start." As January drew to a close, Emma felt the first twinges that suggested her time was approaching. She mentioned nothing to Harrison at first, not wanting to cause undue worry, but by evening the pains were coming regularly enough that she could no longer hide her discomfort. "It started," she told him as he helped her to bed, her face contorting with a particularly strong contraction. Harrison's eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and fear. "I'll send Javier for the midwife," he said immediately, moving toward the door. "There's time yet," Emma assured him, reaching for his hand. "First babies often take many hours, but yes, we should send for Mrs. Blackburn." The midwife arrived 2 hours later, her weathered face calm and professional as she examined Emma. "Coming along nicely," she pronounced. "But as you said, first babies take their time. Try to rest between the pains if you can." Harrison refused to leave Emma's side despite Mrs. Blackburn's suggestion that men usually preferred to wait elsewhere during childbirth. He sat beside the bed, holding Emma's hand through each contraction, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, and murmuring encouragement as the hours passed. Dawn was breaking when the final stage of labor began. Emma's pain intensified, and Mrs. Blackburn positioned herself at the foot of the bed. "Time to push, Mrs. Evans," she directed. "Your baby is ready to meet you." Emma bore down with all her strength, Harrison's hand gripped tightly in hers. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, but she focused on the thought of the child they would soon hold. "I can see the head," Mrs. Blackburn announced. "One more big push now." With a final, tremendous effort, Emma felt the baby slide from her body, and a moment later the room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn. "A fine boy," the midwife declared, quickly wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. "Healthy and strong." She placed the tiny bundle in Emma's arms, and through tears of exhaustion and joy, Emma looked down at her son, their son. He had a shock of dark hair, a reddened, wrinkled face, and when his eyes opened briefly, she caught a glimpse of deep blue. "Harrison," she whispered, turning to her husband. "Look what we made." Harrison's face was transformed with wonder as he gazed at the child. "He's perfect," he said, his voice unsteady. "William Evans, welcome to the world, as Mrs. Blackburn efficiently completed her work. Harrison perched carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Emma's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. "Thank you," he said to Emma, his eyes filled with an emotion too profound for ordinary words. "For this gift, for everything." Emma leaned against his strength, cradling their child between them. "We're a family now," she said simply. "A real family." The news of William Evans's birth spread quickly through the ranch and into Clifton. Visitors came in a steady stream over the following days, Lucas and the ranch hands first, each awkwardly offering small gifts for the baby and congratulations to the proud parents. Then friends from town bearing casseroles and advice. And finally, to Emma's shock, her little sister Grace, escorted by Miss Foster from the school. "Pa doesn't know I'm here," Grace confided as she hugged Emma tightly, her young face alight with excitement as she peered at her nephew. "But I had to see you, Emmy. And him." "I've missed you so much," Emma said, tears streaming down her face as she introduced Grace to William and to Harrison, who treated the young girl with the same gentle courtesy he showed everyone. "You could stay," Emma suggested impulsively. "Harrison wouldn't mind, would you?" Harrison shook his head immediately. "You'd be most welcome, Grace. Your sister speaks of you often." Grace's face fell. "I can't, not yet. Pa would be furious and Ma needs me at home, but maybe someday." She brightened. "Miss Foster says I can write to you now that I know where you are. And maybe visit sometimes." It was a small connection to her past, but Emma treasured it. As Grace prepared to leave, she pressed something into Emma's hand, a small cloth doll that had belonged to them both as children. "For the baby," Grace said. "So he knows he has family in Clifton too." Spring came to the Arizona Territory, bringing new growth to the range and new rhythms to life at the Circle E Ranch. William thrived, growing steadily and developing a sunny disposition that charmed everyone who met him. Harrison proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son, while reviewing ranch accounts as he was teaching the older ranch hands new roping techniques. Emma watched her husband with their child and felt her heart could not possibly contain more love than it already did. Yet somehow, each day brought new depth to her feelings for both of them. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, William sleeping peacefully in Harrison's arms, Emma was struck by how far she had come from the frightened, disgraced girl who had stood in Miller's store less than a year before. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I was thinking about the day we met," Emma replied honestly. "How terrified I was, how certain that my life was over before it had really begun." Harrison's expression sobered. "I remember how you looked so brave despite your fear. I knew then that you were someone extraordinary." "Not extraordinary," Emma demurred, "just desperate." "No," Harrison disagreed gently. "Brave, and every day since has proven it." Emma leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on William's back, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. "I never thanked you properly," she said, "for what you did that day. Not just buying my contract, but marrying me immediately, giving me your name, your protection." "You've thanked me 1,000 times over," Harrison replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "With your courage, your kindness, your love, with our son." He smiled down at the sleeping infant. I went to town that day on ordinary business supplies for the ranch, mail from back east. I never expected to find my future waiting there. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to town that particular day? Emma asked. Harrison's arm tightened around her. I try not to think about it, he admitted. The idea of you being sold to one of those other men. It doesn't bear considering. They sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the narrow margin by which their happiness had been secured. I have something for you, Harrison said suddenly. He shifted William carefully to Emma's arms and reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. I've been waiting for the right moment. Emma looked at him in confusion. What is this? Open it, Harrison encouraged. Inside the box lay a gold band set with a small but brilliant diamond. Emma gasped in surprise. A proper wedding ring, Harrison explained. Our beginning was unusual, but that doesn't mean we can't have the traditional symbols of marriage. He took the ring from the box and held it poised at her finger, where a simple gold band already resided. Emma Evans, I love you with all my heart. Will you continue to be my wife, not because of necessity or arrangement, but because we choose each other? Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Always yes. Harrison slipped the diamond ring onto her finger alongside the plain band, then leaned forward to kiss her tenderly, mindful of their sleeping son between them. I have something for you too, Emma said when they parted, though it's not a gift I planned. Harrison raised an eyebrow questioningly. Emma took his hand and placed it on her stomach, her eyes holding his with joyful significance. If my suspicions are correct, William will have a little brother or sister by Christmas. Harrison's expression transformed with astonishment, then delight. Another child, so soon, Emma nodded, laughing at his stunned face. Mrs. Blackburn confirmed it yesterday. It seems life at the Circle E agrees with me. Harrison whooped with joy, startling William awake. The baby blinked in confusion, then, seeing his father's radiant face, broke into a toothless grin. Life is full of unexpected blessings, Harrison said, gathering his family close, and I intend to treasure every one. As twilight deepened into night, the first stars appearing in the vast Arizona sky, Emma Evans sat surrounded by the love she had never dared hope for, a husband who cherished her, a child who thrived under their care, and the promise of more joy to come. From the darkest moment of her life had come this unimagined happiness, this chance at a future built on love rather than shame. I love you, she whispered to Harrison in the gathering darkness. Thank you for finding me. No, he corrected gently. Thank you for being found. And as the lights of the ranch house glowed warmly against the desert night, the Evans family, brought together by circumstance, but bound now by the strongest ties of love, faced their future with hope, gratitude, and the certainty that whatever challenges might come, they would face them together. 10 years later, the Circle E Ranch had prospered beyond even Harrison's ambitious dreams. The cattle herd now numbered over 500 head. The horse breeding program had gained recognition throughout the territory, and the ranch house had expanded to accommodate the growing Evans family. William, now a sturdy 10-year-old with his father's blue eyes and his mother's gentle nature, had been joined by 3 siblings. Sarah, 8 years old and fiercely independent. Thomas, 6 years old and already showing Harrison's aptitude with horses. And baby Rebecca, just turning 2, the unexpected blessing who had arrived after Emma had thought her family complete. On a bright autumn morning, similar to the one when Harrison had first brought Emma home as his bride, the family gathered in the ranch yard. Harrison, now approaching 40 but still strong and handsome despite the silver threading through his dark hair, lifted 4-year-old Rebecca onto her first pony while Emma watched proudly from the porch, her hands resting on William's shoulders. "Careful now, Becca," Harrison instructed, adjusting the tiny saddle. "Remember what I showed you." "I remember, Papa," the little girl declared confidently, gripping the reins exactly as she'd been taught. Emma smiled at the scene, her heart full as it often was these days. The decade of her marriage to Harrison had brought challenges. Of course, drought years that threatened the ranch, illnesses among the children, the normal strains of building a life together. But through it all, their love had only deepened, becoming the solid foundation upon which everything else rested. "She's not afraid of anything, is she?" William commented, watching his youngest sister with the mixture of exasperation and protectiveness that characterized his relationship with his siblings. "Like her father," Emma replied, squeezing her firstborn's shoulder affectionately. "And like you, my brave boy." William looked up at her with a smile that still melted her heart. Though not Harrison's blood, he was so much his father's son in character and manner that visitors to the ranch never questioned their relationship. The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Lucas, now the ranch's manager as well as foreman, his hair fully gray but his back still straight, rode out to meet it. "It's Aunt Grace," Sarah called excitedly, spotting the visitor first. She ran toward the wagon, her long braids flying behind her. Emma felt the familiar rush of pleasure at seeing her sister. Grace, now 22 and a teacher at the Clifton school, visited regularly, a beloved aunt to the Evans children and a cherished sister to Emma. The years had brought reconciliation with Emma's parents as well, though more slowly and never completely. Her father had finally visited the ranch when William was 3, his gruff exterior softening somewhat in the face of his grandson's unguarded affection. Her mother came more often, especially after Rebecca's birth, seeming eager to make amends through devotion to her grandchildren. "Emma," Grace called, waving as Lucas helped her down from the wagon. "I've brought news." The family gathered around as Grace, flushed with excitement, shared her announcement. She was engaged to be married to the new doctor in Clifton. "That's wonderful news," Emma exclaimed, embracing her sister tightly. "We must celebrate." "A barbecue," Harrison suggested immediately, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "The whole ranch, the whole town if Grace wants. We'll make it an event to remember." Plans were quickly made for a celebration the following weekend. As the family moved inside for lunch, Emma found herself momentarily alone with Harrison on the porch. "Happy?" he asked, his arm slipping around her waist in the familiar gesture that still sent warmth through her after all their years together. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't come to Miller's store that day." Harrison's expression sobered. "I've thanked God every day for leading me there," he said quietly. "When I think of what might have happened to you, to William." Emma reached up to touch his cheek. "But it didn't happen. You saved us both." "You saved me too," Harrison countered. "From loneliness, from a life half lived. Everything good in my world came from that day, Emma." Inside the house, they could hear the children laughing, the comfortable sounds of family life that had replaced the silence of the ranch house when Harrison had lived there alone. "Everything good in my world too," Emma agreed, her eyes reflecting the depth of feeling that 10 years of marriage had only strengthened. "My husband, my children, my home." Harrison bent to kiss her, still with the tenderness that characterized their relationship. "The day I bought your freedom," he murmured against her lips, "I found my own." Together, they turned and went inside to join their family, leaving behind the shadows of what might have been and embracing the joy of what was a life built from an unlikely beginning into something beautiful, enduring, and filled with love.